Welcome to another episode of the WP Crowd. Let's do some introductions. I'm going to start with Andrea. Why don't you go and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Andrea Middleton. What do you want to know, Roy?
What do you do? For those who don't know you.
I'm a community organizer for the WordPress project. I've been overseeing the WordCamp program off and on since 2011. Currently most of my role on the global community team focuses on like really boring logistics and finance and stuff like that. But I also do program management stuff too.
So for our tens of viewers, if you have issues with WordCamps, Andrea Middleton is who you want to contact and complain to.
Or you could just go to wordpress.org Slack and ping somebody in the community events channel because I am only one human.
Yes, totally just joking. Don't contact her. Norcross, why don't you go? Why don't you go up next?
Yeah, Maynard Norcross. I'm a senior engineer and developer advocate over at Liquid Web. I've been an organizer of WordCamps. I've attended many, spoken at many. I've seen them evolve over the last 7, 8 years. And otherwise, I'm just a nerd like everybody else.
Awesome. And Morten.
Hey, I'm Morten. In my day job, I create courses for LinkedIn Learning and lynda.com on things like WordPress and front-end web development. I used to organize WordCamp Vancouver, and I organized the Vancouver WordPress meetup group. And I've also spoken at various WordPress and other types of events over the years.
Cool. Most of you guys know me. My name is Roy, WordPress developer / JavaScript developer, front-end developer. And the reason I found this thing so interesting is because while I do talk at a lot of WordCamps, I also have talked at other tech conferences, which is why I find it very interesting to see what kind of issues are going within the WordPress community and how I see it from kind of another point of view, because I see other tech, tech conferences going on, and I see their issues which are not always completely different, but they're handling it differently, or they've maybe already tackled some of the issues that we're going through. So, point of this conversation actually stems from Morten. He so kindly tweeted something yesterday, and all of Twitter shut down to talk about it. So
to be fair, I piggybacked off an existing conversation and then created a little bubble for the conversation in the WordPress bubble. That's what happened.
So I'm curious if you want to give us like a quick what it is you tweeted for those who might be living in a cave or under a rock. What is you tweeted and what it is you're trying to convey with that retweet, or so to speak.
Okay, so a couple of days ago, Sarah Sueden, who is a person who is fairly well known in the in the web community as a whole. She does a lot of great work. Tweeted the following: if you're asked to speak at a conference, the organizers must cover at least your travel, accommodation, and transportation costs, period. And then I tweeted, this thread is relevant to open source communities. Related, the WordPress community needs to have a serious discussion about paying speakers at WordCamp. By not paying speakers and not paying for travel, accommodation, etc., WordCamps are effectively imposing a privilege barrier on exposure. So from that spanned like 800 different conversations about all sorts of things. But what I wanted to point out was that the fact that in the WordPress community, contribution requires the ability to actually contribute, meaning take time off, maybe travel, and basically suspend your ability to earn money or spend time with your family or whatever to contribute into the community. And that is a significant barrier to a lot of people. And a relatively low-hanging fruit solution to that is to at least cover the upfront expenses that are incurred by someone traveling from one location to another to speak at a conference and share their knowledge with the community. So that's where it started. And then...
So I'd jump in and I'll just say, because as I said earlier that I do talk at other tech conferences, that is the case usually for other conferences. Not all other conferences. I actually have spoken to quite a few people in the I know I'm going to have to say a bad word, the Drupal community. But the Drupal community also has big conferences that don't pay their speakers. And in fact, I think you're lucky if you even get your ticket paid for if you're a speaker. Mm-hmm. At least in the WordPress community, if you're speaking at a WordCamp, you usually get a free ticket. And sometimes if they're really lucky, you'll get a free little—
all $20.
Yeah. If you're really lucky, you'll get like a little speaker gift. And not all WordCamps do this. I know that. But some WordCamps will take some of their budget and give the speakers like a little extra gift on top of all the other swag they're giving out. So there are benefits to it. Like you get, obviously it's not monetary compensation, but if you are a speaker, and here's my biggest thing with this whole conversation is, if you're looking at ROI from a speaker point of view, I don't think your motive as a speaker is correct. Like if you have an ROI in your head that is money based as a speaker, and in let's say the WordPress community, I'm not sure your motives as a speaker are like in the right place. I feel like the WordPress community has always been a community. So it's more like I'm going to share my knowledge because I want to share my knowledge, not necessarily because I want to get money out of it.
Well,
you can disagree.
That's not the conversation, though. That's
I was going to say
conversations that went completely haywire.
I think what Morten was trying to point out, which I agree, is that because open source requires a fair amount of unpaid labor, to participate, we then create a barrier to people whose financial situation does not support them giving free labor to projects. And what we end up with then is we hear a lot from certain segments of the ecosystem / world, and absolutely nothing from the other people who use, possibly also develop, design, etc. within WordPress. But because there is a financial burden on somebody who seeks to travel to speak at a WordCamp, certainly, then those people are effectively silenced if they can't make that financial output. Is that more or less your point?
And just to that end, travel doesn't necessarily mean getting on a plane, going to stay at a hotel. It also means getting someone to watch your kid so you can go to the camp, right? Or getting someone to watch your kid so you can prepare your talk so you can go to the camp. Like, there are significant costs incurred in doing something for any kind of conference that are not the same as the costs incurred when you do contribution any other way, because it requires physically traveling somewhere. It requires setting aside time to do something that simply doesn't happen in any other circumstance unless you intentionally choose to travel somewhere to work. But the majority of, like, my point here is mainly that the WordCamps, if there is no value to speaking at a WordCamp for the WordCamp, so not for the person speaking, but if the WordCamp doesn't see any value in the presentations, which is basically what they're saying by not paying for the travel, then WordCamps have no value in and of themselves. So if you look at it on that level, you say, the reason why people come to WordCamps is to listen to people speaking. And they want to hear these new ideas or explanations of how to do things. And we need to find the best people, but we also need to ensure that we find the people who actually are the best people and have the most important information. And a lot of those people can't come unless they have some help getting there. And if we put the onus on the human being who wants to contribute in this way to pay for their own travel or their own expenses, then we're simply removing the value of their presentation from the equation entirely, which is not realistic in any way.
I mean,
how does that, go ahead, Marco.
I was going to say, like, the idea, every time I've spoken at a non-WordPress event, which has been many, all of them have covered my travel and hotel. Every single one. There's been a handful that have actually given me a check in addition to those things. Now, the check in no way matches up with how much time I spent. and that's fine. I didn't expect it. Furthermore, I mean, I'm not going to track my time, send them an invoice like that. That opens up a whole can of worms that isn't even, sustainable. But, I think a lot of the problem, at least when we're looking at WordCamps, because obviously larger, it's a difference when I'm paying $20 for a ticket and when I'm paying $750. If I'm paying $800 for a ticket to go to something conf, and at that point, yeah, there should be compensation on the other end of that, because also my investment as a attendee at that point is up. And then I expect some sort of investment. Whereas if I'm spending $20 on something, my expectation should be a lot lower. But furthermore, it comes back to, are we, some of these camps have just gotten really, really big. And the idea that, if 5-6 years ago, this would have been a different question, because the sponsorships weren't there like they are now, but also you had maybe 12 speakers, maybe. Miami, I think, had 50 this year between panels and speakers and everything else. Like, you had 40, 50 people. So now you're talking about, obviously the cost of those go up. And, Miami is one of those outlier camps in that they've been established, I think they're coming up in their 10th year. They're run incredibly well. I mean, David does a fantastic job. Not that anybody else doesn't, but he's really good at it. And they always have it in a time of year where people are like, yeah, I would love to leave the North and come to Florida in March or April, when it's still freezing where I live. I remember for years, WordCamp Miami was always the vacation WordCamp for a bunch of people up in the Northeast, because it was frigid cold and ice, and they're like, Miami, it's 85 degrees. That sounds lovely.
For people who could afford to take vacations.
For people who could afford it. And absolutely, yeah. And the question is, if they're, and other people mentioned it yesterday, there is a real issue with certain people just simply not being able to afford it. Putting aside the prep time, because that's different for everybody. And that is kind of, I mean, if anything, that might be the trade-off for whatever exposure and networking and discussions that you're going to have at that event. So your free prep time and what you can pull out of it, maybe we'll call those even, just to make it simple. But yeah, I mean, depending on where you're going, you're looking at $200, $300, $400 or more in flights, $50 in cabs, $150, $250 a night in a hotel, depending on where it is. I mean, yeah, you're looking at about $800, $900 a person, maybe $1,000.
And that assumes that you don't have children and have a partner who could, or if you do have children, you have a partner who can watch them, that you don't have any other dependents that require your care, and all, that you can make that travel even happen, right? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, definitely that is a demographic that is narrow when we talk about, say, the number of people who are using WordPress, which is 28% of the web, right?
But it's the idea that, I guess, and I kind of mentioned this yesterday, is like, I think a lot of us have grown out of WordCamps to a degree. Mm-hmm. I don't remember the last time I saw a talk at a WordCamp that I really pulled anything out of. I might have had a discussion with people that I did, because in 40 minutes, you can't do a technical talk that someone like Roy or Morten or I would be able to learn anything new from, because you can't discuss some of that stuff in 30 minutes. I've seen, 150 talks about either custom post types and then the API, and but for many, many users that attend, that is great stuff for them. I'm the outlier. I totally understand that. In that, I think I've been about 30 WordCamps maybe.
Well,
so,
I mean, that brings up a good point. Like you were saying earlier, like when you spend $800, $1,000 on a ticket, you kind of expect a little bit more than a WordCamp, which is only, let's say, $40 for the weekend. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people who are happy to spend the $40 and they'll get something out of that $40, right? Like,
oh, absolutely.
I think I've spent thousands of dollars on conferences that I've walked away with less information from than some WordCamps that I got to for $20. So
that's both very sad and very happy making for me.
It totally depends on, the subject matter and the quality of the speakers and a bunch of other factors, and like the community that you're in and what kind of event it is. And the reality is the only, like, if someone goes to a conference, any conference, and walks away with one piece of information that they didn't have before, then it was a successful conference for them, right? The question is just, the question at hand is simply, how do we ensure that the voices that are heard at these conferences and replayed ad nauseum on WordPress TV and YouTube and everything, that these voices actually are diverse and present the full spectrum of our community? And by imposing this artificial barrier of saying, oh, you have something to share, then you must travel to share it and you have to pay that cost, then you're taking that away. Now, the reason I'm saying that is, and Andrea's doing the thing with her face that she does all the time when I talk. I love it. It's so funny. You always have this questioning face every time I say anything.
I'm thinking hard, Morten.
I know you're thinking. I just like seeing it. So, for instance, I'm in Vancouver, Canada, right? So Vancouver, Canada has a population of some obscene number of people, like 4 million, something like that, or the greater Vancouver Regional District. So there's WordCamp Vancouver, which has been going on for the past couple of years. We're not doing one this year because all the organizers literally ran away, but there will be one next year. WordCamp Vancouver is, in reality, WordCamp British Columbia. There is no other WordCamp in British Columbia. If you go to Alberta, which is the next province over, there's WordCamp Edmonton. That is the WordCamp for Alberta. That's the local WordCamp for the entire province of Alberta, which is equivalent to a large European country, right? Or 2 or 3 or 5. So this idea that, you know, there are local WordCamps, so people don't need to travel. That works well if you live in some sort of metropolitan area in the United States, but that's not reality for any other place in the world. Like, I went to Norway. WordCamp Oslo is WordCamp Norway. Now, in Norway, traveling inside the country is relatively cheap, but you still have to travel. And they rely entirely on people coming from Denmark, from Sweden, from Finland, from everyone else in Europe into Norway just to speak at a local WordCamp, because that's the only way this works. So all of these things, this idea that everything is local, this idea that a WordCamp is just like a larger version of Meetup, that was true when this all started in like 2009. That is no longer the case now. WordCamps are actual proper conferences, and we need to start playing that game as proper conferences, which just scales up to a larger
yes
conversation.
And no. I mean, I think that in many cases you are correct that one conference becomes the AirSats conference for the whole local area. I mean, there used to be a WordCamp Victoria. Yep. So it's not like there's never been any other WordCamp in British Columbia. And I would love there to.
Victoria is more expensive than for me to go to Seattle.
Right. But my point being that, you know, if the WordCamp, if people in Victoria want to have a WordCamp, there's not a barrier there.
Sure,
it's
but Victoria is a tiny, tiny, tiny town. And the majority of people who went to that WordCamp came from like, 4 or 5 hours away.
Right.
Like geography throws out that idea that there is such a thing as a local WordCamp, in that everyone can walk to the venue and then, or like get in the car and just drive there. That's not actually how this works.
I don't know if geography necessarily is the challenge rather than people, but I think what we run into, the bug that I see in our program in many cases is that we have people that we're asking to be community organizers who self-identify as event organizers. And when you are organizing an event, you focus on getting the best content you can from the resources that you have available. If you see WordCamp as an end in unto itself, then there's kind of no reason to focus on local speakers and dig out those local speakers, because why? Your goal is to put on the best WordCamp you can. If you identify WordCamp as a means to the end of improving and better connecting your local community, then you are not an event organizer, you're a community organizer. And in that time, I would say I would be challenging organizers to say, okay, let's find the people that we have in Vancouver, in Buffalo, New York, who can give us content that will bring our community together and inspire people to do more with WordPress. And I think that in many cases, organizers don't do that. Like, there are a lot of voices in places that we already have WordCamps that are not included because our community organizers aren't always doing the outreach that it takes and the work that it takes to get those people to come and participate in the event and the community itself.
Right. So this boils down to that conversation about what exactly is a WordCamp, because WordCamp Central wants WordCamps to be large local events that are basically oversized meetups. That was how the original WordCamp went about back in, I don't know, 1885.
You're hurting my feelings when you say oversized meetups, but okay.
Well, they're bigger meetups. Were you describing a big meetup?
I mean, it's big. I mean, our minimum viable product is 50 people in a room talking about WordPress all day.
It was the old WordCamp model. It was a more organized, more rigid, slightly more rigid version of the old WordCamp model, which those have all but died off. So,
and the reason why they've died off is because people actually don't need this. They need high quality content because we are working in a professional environment. Like, WordPress is no longer a little toy that people play with. It's actually a serious business. And
the bar camps around me died because they got run over by marketing.
Well, the bar camp here died because the bigger conferences, the people who organized the bar camp went, actually, people want proper conferences. So we're just going to...
I don't think that's the case for everybody, though. That's the thing.
No, it's not. But that's the thing. If this is the model we want to go with, then we have to make 2 tiers. Then we have to make a tier that's the local WordPress event type thing. That's the camp. That's where everyone comes in with all the local people and you try to make a community. And then you have to make another tier, which is, I actually need to learn new things. And then that level then becomes some sort of more professional level where the people come in and we bring in people from outside the WordPress community and we do other things, right? And this is a conversation that every time it's brought up is immediately shut down. And the argument is always, if we do this, then you'll get this 2-tiered system where, like, all the cool kids go to the professional conference and all the other kids go to the other one. And sure, if that happens, that would be unfortunate. I don't think that would actually happen because the majority of people would still go to the WordCamp because that's where they meet people, but they also need that level of training, of exposure to new ideas, of exposure to people who are not in their communities who can bring them new ideas. I mean, the best talks that we see here in Vancouver are people we've never heard of before who come either from the community or from somewhere else and say, look at this thing that we've made that you've never seen before. And the only way we can get to them is either if they come in from somewhere else with a new idea or if they just pop out of the woodworks here. And that happens pretty much on an even keel. So we get some people from outside and some people from inside. But for us to be able to bring in the people who really have good ideas, that might mean we have to go to Roy and get Roy to come up here, right? That costs Roy money. So I'm going to him and saying, please, can you waste money on me? It has no benefit to Roy to go to Vancouver. He can be like, I can record that in my house and just send you a video. But we want him physically in the rooms so people can ask questions. But then we're imposing on him a cost to come and contribute, right?
The events that you're discussing, though, those already exist. They're not WordCamps, but there's plenty of professional conferences. And there's plenty of ones that are higher level dev and design, and they get way more niche. I mean, Roy goes to the Angular ones.
But why isn't there a WordPress conference like that?
But why should
sponsored by
because Central. We're a professional community.
And but that's the whole thing. There's Angular ones.
Of the web. If we believe all the things we say, then we have to act like a community that actually.
Yeah, and I've given talks and put on workshops at non-WordPress events about very much WordPress code. Either I did a workshop on plugin architecture basics. I've given 2 or 3 talks on it there. I mean, as WordPress kind of seeps out into the whole web community on its own, some of us are going to be asked to speak at these larger for-profit paid conferences. And I think maybe that's part of the thing is, like, instead of trying to pull WordCamps into this other space where there are already people doing this who are, yes, event organizers at that point. They're not community organizers, they're event organizers. And I think Andrea made a very good point separating those two things. And, for those, like, when I get asked to speak at those events, I mean, I dress differently, I prepare differently. My talks, I'll tweak them a bit to make them not just 1000% WordPress focused. There's some talks that I do at a WordCamp that I would never do at a more holistic event, and vice versa. I mean, the talk that I gave at Loop, actually, I don't think the foundation would let me give that talk there anywhere else, but there have been other talks that I've given that just wouldn't make sense in one place or the other, and that's fine. I believe that if you try to start, making WordCamp fit every use case, you end up with each part of it not really being that good anymore. And
but is that what we're doing right now? I mean, the complaint that we get, we've organized several different types of WordCamps in Vancouver to try to meet the demands of the community. So one year we did a developer-focused WordCamp. It was packed. It was the first proper developer-focused WordCamp that was ever done. And it was, people came from far, far away just because it was a developer-focused WordCamp. So we ran that. It was hugely successful. And then we got a bunch of people saying, there's not enough user content. So then the next year, we split it. And we said, day one is more like admin-focused, and day two is more developer-focused. And then both the users and the developers came back and said, why can't we have 2 days of all this content? Because they all wanted more of this content. And then the next year, we tried to mix the two of them, and then everyone came back and said there wasn't enough. So everyone who was like at the admin level would complain about too many developer talks. Everyone who was at the developer level would complain about too much admin talk. The reality is this community is extremely diverse, and there's so much need for information at all levels, and trying to cram all of that into single conferences just causes everyone to be unhappy because they're not getting what they want, right? So, but this is a whole other conversation, because regardless of what level we're talking here, we're talking about absolute beginner, here's how to install WordPress, all the way up to, I want to rewrite WordPress into something else, and this is how you start line one, right? At every level in between there are voices in the community that are never heard simply because the cost of attending as a speaker is far too high.
I mean, I would love to see people, submit talks, and with the understanding that don't worry about travel yet. Don't telling them explicitly, don't not submit simply because you don't know if you can afford it or not. Now, there's some stuff scheduling wise that you just know money ain't the issue. That's fine. Like, I'm not going to WordCamp Minneapolis because it's my son's birthday that weekend. Like, it doesn't matter how much money it is. Like, I'm obviously not going. But so for things like that, where I mean, some of the money that some of the sponsor money gets spent on frankly stupid shit. I've seen it. I've done it. I've spent the money on stuff that no one really cares about. Like, it's cool and it's nice, but some of it is like, we have to spend a certain dollar amount because that's the budget. We know that it goes back to the foundation anyway. So we're like, okay, we have this kind of money to spend. Why don't we make dinner a little bit nicer? Why don't we add one more thing to the speaker bag? Why don't we get one quality up on t-shirt? Whatever the case may be. Where you divert some of that money, especially with sponsors, like, okay, if the issue is, we want this person, especially when you start coming into, some of the diversity issues, which again, I'm a white guy. I get that my perspective is very much skewed, where that's not the norm, but like, instead of having a better water bottle, pick up somebody's flight and hotel. Frankly, I know that beforehand I ran a company so I could pay for it. Now I work for a company and they'll cover it. And frankly, I have the money on my own if I really want to go to an event and no one's going to cover it. I know that that is absolutely a place of privilege. So as such, I frankly, for a WordCamp for a $30 ticket, they should not pay my travel. They should not pay my hotel because I don't need it. And I'd rather that money get used for the betterment of the event, the betterment of the community, which frankly isn't always going to be me. The things that's going to make things better for a lot of folk may not apply to me at all. So if it means getting somebody in that maybe hasn't heard, when you're looking at the minority, different minority groups and basically everyone who doesn't look like me, I would absolutely rather some sponsorship money get thrown towards making sure those people get there. And have that be, have those decisions made at the foundation level, at the, above just the actual,
Stop
above,
talking right
I mean, it doesn't have to be you, but as opposed to simply saying, oh, I'm organizing this event and I want my friends to come in from, so you're speaking and I get to decide that you're, just removing that one bit of conflict to say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
Or like, hey, this person's been paid for to go to 5 different events. Maybe we need to find a different person that could use the help. Again, so those kind of things, when you remove it from the, the actual local organizer, who very well may not have any idea what's going on in other camps, then you can, we can start to solve the problem. But I think like turning them into big events is just a bad idea.
I have two things that get me when it comes to, and if the program ever decides to start covering speaker travel, I deeply believe that the only reason we should do it is to support the diversification of the voices that we're having in our program. That said, I think it's complicated when you consider the fact that WordCamps and speaking at a WordCamp are contributions to the WordPress project. And we don't have any kind of compensation paradigm for any other contributor in the WordPress project from the project at this time. So like, there's nobody who says, hey, I could totally send a patch to that ticket if you can cover the cost of my babysitting, my getting a computer that will handle the programs that I need to run that work, or allow me to skip my second shift at Taco Bell tonight so that I can just get a solution down on this particular core bug. Nobody gets financial support for answering questions in the forums or for translating their WordPress into Basque. So if we're talking about compensation to diversify our speaker rosters, I think that can't be the only place that's happening, because it's this is a contribution to the project, right? And so if we're going to financially support speakers doing that, who do get, fact of the matter is, all of us know people who have built their businesses and have become very, very popular and very successful freelancers or business people within the WordPress ecosystem because they went on a WordCamp speaking tour, got a lot of attention, and now have a business where they didn't have one before, right? So there's also, the amount of status compensation that comes from speaking at an event doesn't necessarily correlate to the amount of status compensation that comes from submitting a patch to a really complicated bug or translating an entire WordPress into an entire different language, thereby allowing hundreds of thousands of people to participate in the WordPress project or even just use WordPress. So I think when we talk about something like speaker travel, it has project-wide implications that I think also need to be considered and discussed.
I completely agree, but at the same time, there is a significant difference between traveling physically to a location to do work and doing it wherever you are currently doing work. Yes, there is a cost incurred in contributing to anything at any time. The difference is that if I sit here right now and I stop doing my work and I spend 3 hours writing a code of conduct, that costs my employer whatever they think that 3 hours of my time is worth, right? Or if I was working by myself, it would cost me 3 hours of work. If, on the other hand, I decide to go to WordCamp Seattle in November, that cost me 3 days plus a hotel. That is a cost that is not incurred for any other type of contribution, unless you're talking specifically about organizers of events, of which there should be a whole other conversation, because nonprofits pay people. This idea that nonprofits don't pay people is insane. And organizers of WordCamps, quite frankly, should be paid. But that's a whole other conversation. If we can say upfront, hey, we're having this thing called WordCamp US, and we're covering whatever travel costs and lodging costs at some sort of rational level, like the Holiday Inn, not the Hilton Prima Ultra Gold Suite, then a lot of people who right now look at WordCamp US and say, and they just move on because they know they can't afford it, will all of a sudden start considering it. The problem is when we have this conversation, and this is what was happening yesterday, and it happened, the thing is, this conversation did not happen in the WordPress community. This conversation was happening across the entire tech space yesterday. So if you go outside of just our bubble and you look at this conversation that's happening elsewhere, you'll see there's a lot of stuff going on and a lot of people talking about it, and a lot of big conferences that don't pay people. There are big conferences that make people pay them to speak and stuff like that. So there's more to this, but what came out of it was, on the one hand, you have a group of people who actually have dealt with people who can't get in due to diversity challenges of some kind, either, for whatever reason can't submit. And they all say the same thing. The second they were told upfront that their cost would be covered, all of a sudden they started submitting applications. But if you say your cost might be covered if if you qualify or whatever, that automatically takes that away. So if we were going to do this, we would have to start off by saying, if you incur onerous costs just to come to this event, then it'll be covered. And then you'll maybe put some sort of limit on it. We can only cover like 6 people or whatever, right? And then you pick based on that. But the second you do what some people suggested, which was like set up a Patreon account, then you're putting the onus on the speaker to raise that money, which is a colossal amount of work and likely to just end up funneling money somewhere where it's never spent. If you tell the speaker that you have to find a sponsor, or we can connect speakers to sponsors, again, you are then offloading the responsibility either onto the speaker or onto some organizer to tie 2 people together, and it becomes this very complicated thing. So what I would like to see is something like, we say, if you're going to, let's say the big ones, so WordCamp US, WordCamp Europe, WordCamp Asia, the 3 giant monster WordCamps, right? If people want to speak at these events, they can apply, and it's implied or explicitly stated that the cost of travel and lodging will be covered for people who need it. And then there will be an option for people who apply to say, click this button if your company will pay or you will pay, and that will be considered a micro sponsorship or whatever, right? And not like sponsorship as in we get a logo anywhere. You simply say, I contribute back to the community by paying for my own travel, or my community or my company pays the community by paying for the speaker's travel. That way we'll offset a lot of the costs, and you'll avoid that problem which people keep bringing up, which is, then you get all these professional speakers who earn money this way. That is not what this would be. It would literally be, we take away the barrier, and then we allow people who can't, who just automatically say no right now, to be able to apply to speak at our events.
Yeah, I mean, I look at what Loop did, and their thing was, they covered the hotel, which granted it was at a resort hotel, so they put people there and it made sense. So the hotel was taken care of, and in the U.S., your flight, they cover up to a certain dollar amount. International was a bigger amount. And that seemed, that's one of those things where like that seemed fair to me, where it's like, we're going to cover X, and they said right up front, we're going to cover X, and so that way, it's one of those, okay, if they're going to cover 400, or I don't remember the exact number, but all I know is that I was able to get my round trip flight, and I didn't have to pay anything out of pocket, or I was able to either pay for it and they reimbursed me right away or whatever it was. But setting that, starting with something like Europe and US and Asia, where like that's considered, that is not considered a local event. Like, that's why they got split up that way. So those are no longer, so the local argument goes away when you start talking about US or Europe or Asia. So yeah, I mean, and like you're saying, time is money, and that's great and all, but I choose where to spend my time. Whereas if I'm going to an event, that is a tangible, real cost that is incurred by, whether or not my talk is any good, whether or not I get laryngitis and, or anything, like those costs are all there, or whether or not I show up and the event decides to never open the front door, like that's still money out of my pocket. So, covering those very basic expenses that, that are also very, those are auditable. It's not like, oh, here's a stipend, here's random money that we're never going to check up on. It's like, no, here's your receipt from Delta, and we covered the receipt from Delta. It's very easy, from an accounting, everything else, it's very straightforward, and it's way more straightforward than just saying, oh, we're going to cover, we're going to give people X, and we're going to, run through all these, crazy merit based. And then, if there's people that number doesn't cover it, then sponsors can come in and be like, okay, you know, we have someone, or we have a deficiency of $2,000 to cover the rest of travel for everybody. And a sponsor can step in with that. As opposed to, you know, here's a second drink ticket at an after party.
Yeah, I feel like they're definitely, the third-party WordPress related conferences are kind of like that next tier right now. I feel like if WordCamps were to start paying, optional or not, for speakers, you're going to kill off a lot of that localness, I feel like. Because all of a sudden, oh, bear with me for a second as you shake your head. If some random WordCamp happens in the Midwest, WordCamp I would never ever go to out of my own pocket, but now they're willing to pay for my travel and my stay, I'd apply to speak, and I'm sure I wouldn't be the only one that would want to apply to speak because they know they can get there for free. And you know, again, it does help status agenda, whatever. There are, you know, benefits to going and speaking, even at a random small little WordCamp in the Midwest. But I wouldn't apply to that out of the, like, right now. But if I knew that, hey, my flight and my hotel was covered, I'd apply. And I feel like that would be the case for a lot of
Free
other
trip to Boise. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Never been to Boise before.
So
why not?
Wouldn't that kill a lot of the local community who are trying to speak at their own, even if they're, you know, even if they're 3 hours away, like a little more local than I am? Wouldn't that deter? Because as you said earlier, you want good speakers for your conference, right? And if someone who's in Boise, who's never spoken before, decides, okay, this is the year I'm going to apply to speak, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but like the organizer's like, well, here's the random person who's in Boise that's never spoken before, or here's Roy or Norcross or Morten who's spoken online. We know they give a good talk, and you know they're also applying. Wouldn't we give it to them so that our conference is now a better conference for our?
And that's a failing on the organizer's part. I mean, because you know, if they're in Boise and it's a speaker from Boise, they should know who the hell that person is. Otherwise, you know. And if they don't know who it is, they should find out, because if that person feels enough connection to the community to want to talk at a WordCamp and you don't know who they are, like that's a weird scenario to come up. I mean, I know what you're saying, but that's very odd that you wouldn't know that person.
Well, I'm saying if they've never spoken before, like I've talked to a lot of people who are like, hey, I've never spoken at a WordCamp before. And, you know, imposter syndrome up to wazoo with a lot of people.
Yeah. And that's we get speaker submissions like what, 3 months ahead, for, you know, sometimes 6 months ahead, and having, you know, if they've never spoken and you decide that their talk looks pretty good and maybe you've seen some stuff, have them come to your meetup, speak in between. You know, if you find out, oh, okay, this person is a terrible speaker, you can address it that way, one way or the other. Or if it's like, wow, this person's really good, I want to make sure that they're in a spot that more people will see them. Or their talk is something that, you know, the description doesn't, you know, you can deal with a lot of those speaker issues, you know, have them come to your meetup. And again, if they live in Boise, there's like 9 people there anyway, so they probably know each other. But
all the people from Boise just turn off.
I was gonna say, like, I mean,
I think we do have a meetup there.
I'm told it's cold there. That's really all I know about it, and frankly, I could go the rest of my life never finding out anymore. But the, you know, like, and frankly, like the smaller events, like if I want to go to a Boise WordCamp, that's on me, and that's between me and my employer and my bank account whether or not I'm going to go. Now, if I'm if I'm a voice that made, you know, like I probably look like a lot of people that I know. So the question now becomes, okay, do I want to bring in, you know, a woman, person of color, someone who's gay, trans, whatever, who some of these people in Boise maybe have never seen in their life. And I know that I'm being drastically generalizing, you know, the Midwest, but like, again, that's a different, you know, and that's something where I'd almost want to approach that on an individual basis. And then because I know when I did speakers for Tampa, I reached out to speakers I wanted, both locally and outside the space. Like, I want you to speak at the camp, and then it went from there. So, you know, being an organizer of a camp, you should be connected enough to know these people both in your own space and, you know, some of the broader people that, you know, because again, having some of those people that, you know, are well known in the community helps the local event, because, oh, I want to go see this person, I want to go see Chris Lama speak, or I want to go see, you know, somebody, you know, I want to go see Helen play the piano and speak, which was one of the most amazing things I ever saw. And it was sadly on video because I didn't go because I couldn't afford it. But you know, the organizer should know that well enough to be able to go deal with those situations one-to-one. And whereas the larger events like the US, and it could be to say, we're going to pay up to $400 on a flight. We got your hotel for these 2 nights or these 3 nights, and international will cover 600 and, or whatever the dollar amount is, I don't know. And that'd be it. You know, and you could easily say, hey, if you really want to speak and this won't cover it, let us know. You know, because we can't always catch every edge case of an individual at a particular individual at a particular event, and trying to get that, doing nothing until until all those edge cases are met means it'll just never happen. So I'd rather see something very tangible and implemented, being like, yeah, for WordCamp US, WordCamp Europe, Asia, we'll cover flight, we'll cover hotel. We're not going to pay you. That's on you. Because again, you're still voluntarily saying, I want to speak there. But those very basic things to be like, yeah, we'll put you on a plane here and we'll make sure you got a place to sleep. Like, I think that, especially as a starting point, that would be incredibly fair and easy to implement, in the sense of it's not organizers picking who they like per se. It's not, getting to lord over people a sponsorship money, like, oh, I'm going to be able, do you really want to come? Again, who knows? I don't want to think that any of that crap happens, but I've heard some really, really bad stories about other events outside of the WordPress space. So like, I don't want to say anything is impossible.
You could have heard it from inside the WordPress community too, because that stuff does go down.
Oh yeah, it does.
I organized WordCamp San Francisco 2014, and we did a very elaborate, widespread travel assistance program to support the community summit that happened that week, and then also to support as an experiment to see what it would take to provide that kind of travel assistance, to diversify the speaker roster and the participation, and the people who are participating in the event. So not just speakers, but also in some cases volunteers. And it was a little bit different because it was, the community summit for that year. And we don't have community summits every year, but there was a community summit that year, and it happened in association with that WordCamp. And that was some work, people. I'm telling you right now, that was like 2 or 3 people working hard on reviewing travel assistance applications for a good month or 2. And then also just the way we ended up supporting travel was also super, super complicated. It is a hard, resource intensive kind of program. I'm not saying it doesn't have its benefits, but it is not an insubstantial.
Yeah, but if you remove the whole idea of having to submit and ask for it.
Yeah, exactly.
And say, right, you're going to get X dollar, your flight up to this and hotels covered, period. End of story. You don't have to ask for it. I could say I don't need it. There's other ways that could be, for those that don't, but, because I don't want a speaker to have the beg to, or be worthy of, it's like, if it's worth it and you want them to be there, then they're worth it and you want them to be there. It's not, they're worth it and you want them to be there as long as it costs you less than X. Like, that's bullshit. Either you want them there or you don't.
And the other thing is, when you have a program like that where people have to apply, that in itself is an enormous barrier, because then people have to sit there and say, I am one of those people who requires someone else to pay for me to go there, which is a huge step for someone to do, right? And it's a colossal amount of work. So, and
it's also othering for the people who are participating. Right?
Yeah,
they're identified as someone who is not the same as everybody else in the event.
Exactly.
Yeah, systemically, it has some problematic aspects.
It's complicated, and I think in this context, it overcomplicates a very straightforward process, which is it should just be, we cover expenses. We've bought like a stack of rooms in a hotel. We have a deal with this airline or this airline group or whatever, right? And we have a budget of this much. We can pay for these many speakers. To your point, Roy, that the fear that paying for speaker travel will result in tons of people basically using it as like free vacation system. First of all, that doesn't happen in real life. That is an invented concern that everyone has because it seems obvious that would happen. But if you look at conferences that do this, this is not something that does happen. Of course, when you go to higher levels, you can look at conferences and say, well, you keep seeing the same people speak at many different conferences. That's usually because those conferences are organized in a different way. So they say, we need to have a certain number of attendees because we need to earn our money. So we're going to bring in these heavy hitters that will bring in the money. But in the case of WordPress and WordCamps, the conference itself doesn't earn any money. Like we're charging like the bare minimum for attendance. So there's no incentive for the organizers to like bring in heavy hitters, and it'll cost them too much money. On the flip side of that, it is not hard for a conference to say, we're going to bring in, like, we're going to set a limit and say, we're only going to have like this many local speakers or this many people from outside the community, which we already have, right? They're already rules in place that say mostly in local or whatever. I've never seen those numbers, but there are some
it's
things.
80-20. It's
80-20.
A recommendation.
Yes, but like, that's the thing.
No one goes after anybody.
If organizers are responsible about what they do, this shouldn't be an issue. If organizers make sure that they don't bring in, like, if we see that, oh, there's someone speaking about whatever in Seattle, and then we bring in the same speaker here to speak about the same topic in Vancouver 2 months later, then we're being bad at our jobs, right? Then we're not doing what we're supposed to do. Of course, that requires some coordination between WordCamps to make sure we don't have like massive overlap in the same area. But I think that's a big ass red herring in this conversation, because the number of people who would use this as a travel assistance program are low. And if the organizers do their job properly in speaker selection, which is another huge conversation, then this shouldn't happen, right?
Yeah, because at no point has any event been like, oh, let me write a talk, let me take time off of work, let me arrange someone to watch my dog and make sure that my son is taken care of. Let me fly, which in and of itself, I hate flying with passion. And let me go to a place that I may or may not have any interest in going to, even if it's a nice place. Like I already live in a tourist trap. I don't need to go to another one. For essentially what is a $300 flight. $300-400, it's rare that I can, with the exception of Paris, I don't remember the last time I spent more than $400 on a flight for me. Especially if I had any sort of lead time or if I didn't have to be there on a very particular day. So, the idea that I'm going to use the camp and put in all that work and effort to be, go to, again, if we're going to make fun of Idaho, let's stick with it, to make fun of Idaho. If I really want to go to Idaho, I'll just go there and I'll do it on my own time, and I'm sure it's very lovely. But the idea that, remove that stuff. But yeah, do it with the big ones. Like do it with the ones where like WordCamp US is supposed to be the showcase for the year. It's supposed to be, this is the big one. This is the best of the best. This is this is where everybody is trying to put on, give their best talk. Every sponsor is trying to impress you with whatever it is they're building, so on and so forth. Like, yeah, you can swing some, and cover the travel. The local stuff, I mean, frankly, because now we get into the fact of, okay, should this area actually be sustaining a WordCamp if now we're incurring these kinds of costs? And again, that is a whole other different discussion, one that I'd have to do later because I have to cook dinner for my son here momentarily. But I think if you just hit the one, the nationals, I guess is the best way to call them, or the continentals, and do it with a flat dollar amount, then it's fine. Because I remember for years, like the budgets were very, very static, and enough people said, hey, it costs different money in San Diego than it does in Omaha. We need to be able to adjust our budgets accordingly because everything costs different. And after a while, that was like, understood, like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like, we're not going to go crazy, but we're going to be, we're going to make sure that locals, if it is local, like the costs and the budgeting matches the locale, and everything isn't set on one number. So, I mean, the same thing could be done for the Continentals, which I don't know if there's a name for that, but I think I like that name. I'm going to go with it now. The Continental camps. And, just cover those flat, dollar amounts. And that way you got your speakers in the same hotel, which means you can have, there's a whole bunch of fringe benefits as an organizer to having people in and around the same place and knowing when they're coming in and leaving.
Yeah, so I totally agree. And I also agree that there's many other conversations that are to be had or were had yesterday that could be flushed out even more. We've already gone way over our normal podcast time, but I figured this was a good conversation to let that happen. But yeah, I do agree personally that there should be another level, whether it's the regional or the whatever you called it, continental camps. I feel like right now the third-party camps are kind of taking that space. So there's kind of a room for Central maybe to come in and say, hey, we're gonna we're gonna create a camp in this realm. But right now it seems like niche third-party is where it's at right now for WordPress speakers who want to, have graduated out of WordCamp, or attendees who graduate out of WordCamp more specifically. They're going to these niche conferences and paying more for them because they're actually getting more out of them, which is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that's what it is right now, and I'm curious to see how it'll evolve a little bit more. I think that we're still evolving, yeah. So I'm gonna call it. Thank you guys for joining, and I'm sure we'll have a part 2 and 3 and 4. And Twitter will still, be going crazy for a while, and this is kind of a never-ending conversation because it can't appease everybody. So with that, if you guys are watching for the first time, make sure to YouTube, subscribe, like the video, and do everything else for the WP crowd. Check out Morten and everybody else that was on today. They're all pretty cool, and don't complain to Andrea about WordCamps. They're all really, really cool. Just appreciate.
You can complain to me about things.
Just appreciate the
care.
coolness that
you gotta complain to somebody.
WordCamps are amazing, and I hope that no one gets deterred. Based on this conversation, no one gets deterred from going to them because every single WordCamp I've gone to has been fantastic. In one way or another, they've all kind of proven themselves to be, there's a need for them, and I love them all. See you guys next week.